Close to the water was a performance I did on the River Aura in Finland. It was based on my experiences of balancing this single-scull boat. I practiced for the performance on the River Tarn near my home in France. As you can see from the way that I'm carrying it, it's a very lightweight boat, which means it can go very fast, but you have to balance it with the oars. It's a bit like flying or being in zero gravity with just those thin oars to balance me. If I make a mistake, I'll capsize. Rowers have their own names for all parts of the rowing action. You can see me doing the catch here, and then I take a stroke, and then I swing, and then I come to the finish, as you see here. It's all enhanced by technology designed to make it go faster. The sliding seat that I'm sitting on is a disputed invention, either happening in the north of England or New York in the middle 19th century. The outriggers, which you can see either side of me, are actually stolen from Pacific Island technology 1,000 years ago. My work in rowing has also inspired a social media group called Wild Rowing, where people can post different images of different types of rowing. But here we have a very interesting picture of Buckminster Fuller, who invented these rowing needles so he could travel from his island in Vancouver to the mainland. And that inspired this Brazilian artist called Guto Lacaz to build a 8-oared version of the rowing needles. It's also inspired artist Neil White to work on this collaboration. I'm doing this with him. The Rowed Lab, using Buckminster Fuller's principle of the rowing needles. You can see us testing it here on a lake in Finland. The idea is that it's a contingency vehicle that can take transmission equipment to disaster areas. Here we see the phenomenon of the church boat in Finland. This enormous thing, it's called the kyrkövin. It's often seen going up and down the River Aura where I did the performance. For many, though, this was the only way to get to church, the only social contact with villages for a week. The boats could either also be carrying a corpse in a coffin or on their way to be buried. The outward passage was quiet and sombre, but with perhaps the singing of sacred songs. But on the way back, the church boat atmosphere changes, perhaps reflecting the pagan past. The return trip was an opportunity for locals racing, with men doffing their dark hats and jackets in an atmosphere that was anything but reverential. It is not known exactly how the church boat evolved, but it must, I think, have been influenced by the Viking longboat in the pre-Christian times when the Norse tribes settled in Finland, sharing a pagan religion with the Finns. Viking is also a verb, and the boats were used to go Viking, i.e. raiding, but it is disputed whether the Finnish tribes also did this. I can't help thinking that the wild row back from church resonated with the rowers' shared pagan heritage with the Vikings, breaking through the Christian church's system of control, throwing off the formal Sunday clothes and racing to the finish. Now we see 100 years ago the sport of rowing developing. And it would seem like a male sport, but here is Maribel Vinson, also an ice skater in the 50s, joyful on the River Charles in Boston, and she inspired women's rowing as we see it now. This is the Cherpakov Rowing Club in Bulgaria. As you can see, they have a dark sense of humour, breaking the ice to try and take one of these single-scull boats. And this is what, of course, happens in the comedy if you fall in. And humour is quite an interesting part of the culture of rowing. Here we see the apparently aristocratic nature of rowing, the rowing clubs, Oxbridge. But actually, it was a working class sport. People used to row up and down the river for money. This is the unique cross-border project by Turkish artist Ihsan Banabak and Austrian artist Gerald Hanninger, Rowing for Europe. They rowed this boat all the way up the Danube, passing Serbia, Hungary, Moldova, and ending up in the Black Sea, and then finally Ukraine. And this is another virtual version of this performance, Close to the Water, which I did in Dundee with the Beau Gamelan Ensemble. That's Anne Bean and Richard Wilson. And after giving a lecture on rowing, they served on these rowing blades a cocktail. And now to the performance itself, Close to the Water on the River Ora in Finland.
To row this light single-scull boat towards you today, and to say something about the resonances between art, rowing, and the history of the water here, and draw some parallels with the themes of this festival. The church boat was in use since the Reformation in the 17th century, and the church made it compulsory to maintain them. For many, this was the only way to get to church. Close to the water. Close to the water. The water. Close to the water.
This is showing the fragility of the rower,
or eggs.
close to the water, as we need the oars to stop us from falling in. If you let go of the oars, we'll fall in. It may be that
The cocks yelled the tempo for the rowers, and the non-rowers swayed themselves, and so eager were they to win that they were aching all over after the race for several days. If a village developed a particularly fast boat, they hid it on their return, so other villages could not emulate it.
I like to try and experience the intense nature of the community that this brings. When the sea levels rise, we may all be living on islands and lakes, and we may all need to rely on close communities, as those church boat communities did. This light boat below me is also the symbol of the intense form of capitalism that makes us want to go faster. It's interesting to compare the church boat race's evolution into another watery tradition. Close to the water. Close to the water.
The development of fast light boats for the sport of rowing follows a parallel path with the history of capitalism. For example, the development of faster and faster sailing clippers to beat the opposition to the market. As Paul Virilio said, the invention of the ship was also the invention of the shipwreck.
Close.
It's difficult not to draw parallels here with the practice of classical performance art.
Religion. Training in the morning and pushing their bodies and boats to go faster. The modern day Episcopalian royal priest Stacey Grossman takes the religious analogy one step further. Rowers move forward, backwards, which demands absolute trust in the one steering and directing. When we give in to the greater goal, we sometimes feel that we are flying. There are deep spiritual lessons we learn on the water. About leading, about following, about control, about winning and losing, and I try to pay attention to them. Rowing for me is the spiritual and physical practice of the most satisfying order. Later that night, the boat was in the middle of the lake, and he was alone on land. He saw the disciples straining at the oar, trying to get my position.
The body itself becomes a medium of artistic expression, walking on water, stripping away artifice and releasing a collective energy between the artist and the battery of the audience. As Boyce said, even the peeling of the potato can become a work of art if it's a conscious act.
and the trumpet solos. In an act of sensorial empathy, I invite you to imagine yourself embodied in this boat, unbalanced, adapting the words of the festival. I hope history.
To scull this boat, thinking and not thinking about the way I take a stroke, like this, it's a conscious act. It is a post-art action. The fragility of this position symbolises the fragility of society torn apart by nationalism, fear of immigrants, and in an act of sensorial empathy. I invite you to imagine yourself embodied in this boat, unbalanced, right here in this light boat, on the water.
I'm going to row this boat away as fast as I can from the Church of New Performance. Let the boat sing.
This virtual performance was based on material done in collaboration with Turku Rowing Club for New Performance Turku in 2018.